Okay, so we're thrilled to be joined today by filmmaker James Cullen Bressack. James has had a really interesting career in a relatively short amount of time, producing, writing and directing dozens of films, and all even before he's turned 30. His latest film, directed by James, the action thriller Survive the Game, starring Bruce Willis and Chad Michael Murray, is available on digital platforms soon. James, thanks so much for joining us, and fresh from vacation, I believe. How are you today?
Yeah, hey, I'm good. I'm unbelievably sunburned, but I'm good.
Oh, cool.
I totally forgot that you got to wear sunscreen if you spend all day in a pool. And I made that mistake day one of vacation, which made like the following days horrible.
So where have you been? Have you been somewhere nice? And where are you joining us from today as well?
I was in Mexico, and I'm in Los Angeles right now.
Oh, cool. So first of all, could you give our listeners a bit of a setup, a bit of a premise to Survive the Game?
So basically, Survive the Game is like a 90s throwback action movie. So for me, it's essentially like, Chad Michael Murray's character is super upset. He goes to sleep, and when he wakes up, an entire action movie has showed up on his front lawn. It's like cops and robbers, drug dealers, good guys versus bad guys, just fighting it out right in front of him, right at his house. And he's got to choose a side and survive.
Nice. Yeah. It's a heck of a lot of fun as well. And I think it's fair to say we both really enjoyed watching it.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Good. So can you tell us a little bit about how the kind of project came about, whereabouts on the kind of timeline you got involved? When did you start the production, that sort of stuff?
So I got involved, the script was already there and Bruce was already attached, and I got brought in to direct around that time. And then from there, we kind of like shaped the script a little more, and then Chad got involved, and then we developed the movie a little more to fit the setting of Puerto Rico.
Perfect, amazing, and it looks beautiful as well. I was quite jealous. Sat watching it on a rainy England day in this beautiful setting. I've got to ask, sort of, with this film, but some other projects you've worked on as well. You've worked with a lot of legends that you've no doubt grown up watching. Bruce Willis, Steven Seagal. What was the experience like actually directing Bruce Willis? And did you ever have that sort of pinch yourself moment, like, shit, I'm directing John McClane right now? How was that?
So like, it's funny. It's the same thing. So like when I worked with Christopher Lloyd also, and it's like, sometimes it doesn't click that it's the person until like they're in front of camera and they're doing their thing. And you're like, I remember Christopher Lloyd was just like hanging out on set, and I was like, oh, hey, nice to meet you, Chris, like blah, blah, blah. And he just seemed like a regular dude, like just like this, it was just, there was nothing intimidating. Then he got in front of camera and I was like, holy shit, that's Doc Brown. Like it took me like a while, and with Bruce, like it was the same thing. Like, it was like, oh, hey, Bruce, blah, blah, like, and then suddenly, like, he got in front of camera. I was like, oh shit, it's Bruce. It's Bruce Willis. Off camera, I was like, dude, it's B-Dubs. I was like, I called him B-Dubs, but on camera, I was like, oh my God, this is Bruce Willis. And I remember I posted a picture. I took a picture. I was like, little kid me is giving adult me a high five. But yeah, it was cool. It was, I worked with Bruce twice, once on this movie, and then again on Fortress. And I think, we really hit a stride on working together on after doing two.
It's such an impressive production, and there's so much action going on there. You've got car chases, you've got a lot of guns involved there. You've got lots of good sort of hand-to-hand combat choreography. It must have been quite challenging as a director. How much of that, what were the challenges for you, and how much of that was you sort of pushing yourself and finding, coming across new challenges?
I was pushing myself nonstop. Like, we were up against the clock the entire time. So I remember I was literally doing stuff like, we had a couple cameras. So like, instead of using both cameras in a scene, I would do stuff like I started doing like what I had read, like Peter Jackson, like during Lord of the Rings, would like fly from like little mini set to little mini set of stuff being set up. And so like what I started doing is I started setting up a scene and having like, you know, like them start to light it and all that stuff, working it out with the actors. And then I'd go shoot this scene over here while that's being set up. And so by the time this one was done, I could leapfrog immediately to this one because it was ready to shoot. So I was nonstop leapfrogging at certain points, like literally like directing like 3 different like little units at the same time, just bouncing around, none of them filming without me there. So I was just like a pinball, like flying around these things. Because I just, the way I looked at it is I was like, this is a Bruce Willis movie, you know what I mean? People are expecting nonstop action. So I was like, you know what? It had like, you know, in the script, it had action, but it wasn't as nonstop action as this.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to make it nonstop action. Like, you know, Joel Silver model, anytime anybody even crosses somebody's path, like it's going to be a fight scene or this or that. So I started adding in fights and I started adding in elongating fights. So like, you know, the kitchen fight scene was supposed to be a quick thing. I was like, nah, this is going to be some like the raid shit. Like this is going to be like a nonstop fight. They're gonna like break everything in that kitchen and destroy this place. Like I was like, you know, the barn fight was just supposed to be like a quick struggle over the gun, and then he shoots him. Like that little bit at the end of the barn fight was supposed to be like the whole thing. And I was like, nah, this is gonna be like this nonstop fight. I just like stretched everything out as much as possible because I was like, you know what? That's what people are going to expect of a movie like this.
Yeah, and I think the end product is so entertaining to watch, and you know it's an intense 90 minutes of out and out action, and it looks like something that as a filmmaker it must have been really enjoyable to make. And can you tell us a bit about the sort of the atmosphere on set? It looks like it was a lot of fun for the whole cast and crew.
Yeah, man, we all had a lot of fun, especially because like, you know, I really wanted to add more comedy than what was originally in the script. So like, you know, I encouraged improv some of the time. So like, you know, a lot of like the Ed and English stuff, like they were coming with some of the really funny improv stuff going on there, back and forth, or, you know, it's like, it's actually UK versus like, you know, English, like, it's really funny. And you know, I think there's like a lot of that is funny. I think Bruce has a really moment where he's like, yo, can you guys shut the F up? As like, you know, we have the gun, right? Like that was all improv between the 3 of them. And I thought like, you know, I encouraged that because the movies I grew up on, the action movies I loved, had so much comedy in them. And I feel like action movies have gotten so much more serious as like we've like, you know, especially like I think it's happened with Casino Royale. Like once like James Bond got super serious, all action was like, oh, we got to be super serious, Dark Knight serious. You know, and I was like, you know what? No, like let's make this fun, like the Joel Silver, like, you know, exit wounds type action, and, you know, like Lethal Weapons or like the, you know, Demolition Man, where it's just like, let's joke around, let's have fun, let's have stuff be more silly and entertaining in that aspect.
Sure. And we spoke then about you sort of, you know, pushing yourself on set and that. And it seems to me that throughout your career and, you know, short career in that you're sort of only 30 odd,
I'm only 30, but I've been directing movies for 11 years. So
exactly. Yeah, exactly. But it seems to be along that way. You seem to be pushing your boundaries one way or another. So, To Jennifer was famously shot and edited on an iPhone 5, I believe. Is that right? And even though it wasn't your intention, Hate Crime was deemed too much for UK viewers. The BBFC wouldn't classify it. So, I'm interested. Is pushing your limits and innovating something that you always set out to do in your projects? And
I mean, it for sure, but also I would say, like, isn't that something that we should all set out to do at any time?
Absolutely.
Like, you know, when I get a script, or like when I write a script, when I start to make a movie, my first thing is, how do I make this better? How do I make this bigger? You know, because if I'm just doing what's like there, what's on the page or what's on this, like I look at a script as a blueprint, right? So it tells you how like the thing is, you know, how the house is built, but nobody's going to tell you what's on the walls. Nobody's going to tell you what the walls are made out of. Like, you got to figure out how you're building this thing. So like for me, I just try to elevate as much as possible, because, you know, the way I look at it is, it doesn't matter the amount of shoot days. It doesn't matter the budget. It doesn't matter anything, right? the audience is still paying that same $5.99 to rent it, or like $4.99 to rent it, as they are like a Marvel movie. So I have a responsibility to my audience to get as close to that as humanly possible. And I you know, like, this is not a Marvel movie. I have not hit that level, but I have a responsibility to try every single time. So I push myself for the audience because I know what everybody's expecting.
Brilliant.
Yeah, definitely. Wow, fantastic. So we spoke a little bit about the comedy involved in it, and that was, you know, really, really nice to see, and especially, you know, Bruce.
Also, wait, sorry, one quick. I just want to clarify again. This is not a Marvel movie. You know, I failed in that aspect, but I'm just trying to fail a little better every single time.
No, man. And I was saying, the end product is I mean, it's just as entertaining and edge of the seat sort of stuff, definitely. And it's an intense 90 minutes of absolute enjoyment there.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
And I found it a really, really interesting film, and like you spoke about the kind of influences. I like how, and you say about sort of Chad's character wakes up and he's in an action film, but also you could argue that, you know, between scenes it sort of jumps genres, and that's really, really cool and like interesting to see. For me, like, were there any specific influences when you were directing it? For me, I saw things like, you know, obviously, as we said, the Joel Silver stuff, Last Boy Scout was a big thing, you know, obviously with Bruce, bit of Reservoir Dogs in there, you know, it almost goes a little bit Rambo at one point, and there's definitely horror elements in there. You know, I was kind of flashing back to kind of Halloween and Michael picking off, you know, the well, air quotes, bad guys, you know, one by one. So was there any sort of specific influences for you when you were making it?
So many, not only from like how I had characters dressed, like I had each character dressed like one of my favorite action movies, or one of my favorite movies. So I had, like, you know, Cal was very like a throwback to Narc. I had, like, you know, obviously Ed and English. One of them was dressed like a Guy Ritchie movie. One was dressed like, you know, Taxi Driver. I mean, so I kind of had stuff hark back to like the movies I really love. But also, like, you know, it's funny you said Rambo. If you talk to Sven, who played Cal, when we were filming that in that jungle area, I kept saying, like, I'm filming Rambo. This is my Son of Rambo scenes.
Yeah.
And he was like, you know, so like I kept, you know, I would start to talk and, like, you know, listen to the soundtrack of like the movie that I was like making at certain times. So I was trying to jump genres a lot. You know, and overall, like, you know, definitely heavily inspired by Robert Rodriguez as well, which is why the score kind of went the way that it did, I think. As well as not only the score, but, like, you know, I think I fought really hard to get all the needle drops, the actual songs that I got in there, like DMX, Junior Wells, like all that stuff to add more flavor to this movie. I think the opening title sequence as well, like I fought to have like an interesting opening title sequence with that song, and I think that kind of helped push the vibe of the film as well. I was saying, but I was definitely heavily inspired by the movies I grew up on, and it'd be too many to name. I could name, like, you know, tons of different scenes where I'm like, this shot was supposed to be like my throwback to this, you know.
So as a filmmaker, I'm interested in the it's a very interesting time for films and for cinema, in that, you know, irrespective even of COVID and lockdowns and things like that, there's sort of underlying what some might see as a threat with the increasing number of streaming services and that becoming so prolific. Do you see, as someone who makes movies, do you see cinema and streaming services two things that can coexist sustainably with each other, or is one a threat to the other? And I guess as a filmmaker, I mean, how much are you conscious of sort of where your film might make up and end up, and is it always, I don't know, the sort of is the drive always to see your film on the big screen?
Of course, the drive is always to see it on the big screen. I mean, you know, here's the thing. Yeah, I think obviously the two can coexist. And, you know, I'm a fan of, you know, I have every streaming service, literally all of them. So, like, you know, I love movies and stuff, but I'm not going to pretend that, like, going to the theater is not, like, you know, something that, like, I absolutely love. You know, going to the movies is like, that's my meditation, like, you know, going to see a theater. And I'll tell you, like, I am about, 98% more likely to like the exact same movie seeing it in a theater than I am going to at home. Because at home, like, you know, your phone rings, you're going to look at the phone, you're going to this, you're going to that, like you're going to get your cat's going to do something, like you're going to get sucked out by something. You'll be like, you know what, let me go make a sandwich real quick. Let me just pause this, you know, like in the movie theater, you just like tune in, drop out. You're watching this movie until it's done. Like you're not, I'm not on my phone, like going like, oh, let me check who's on Instagram while this scene's boring. You know what I mean? Like, I think it saves me from some of my ADD. So I love the movies, and it is an unmatched experience. So I don't think that that's going to go away.
Cool. Yeah. Do you mind me asking you a little bit about you know, your infancy of your career, and what brought you into the world of movies? I mean, I know, am I right in saying that your dad was involved in TV? Is that right? And sort of animation? Yeah. And did that have some influence in you coming into the world of, you know?
Oh, of course. You know, my father was, you know, a 3-time Emmy award-winning screenwriter. So he was like one of the head writers of Pinky and the Brain, Animaniacs, Tiny Toons, The Smurfs, Scooby-Doo, Darkwing Duck, the Snorks, Bionic Six, Mighty Max, Captain Simian and the Space Monkeys. You know, the list goes on and on. But these, like, he did so many things that, you know, I think shaped a lot of childhoods. But, you know, as far as, you know, with me, he instilled a love of storytelling and filmmaking. And you know, my father really, you know, was instrumental in me becoming a filmmaker, not because he gave me, you know, introduced me to people or anything like that. You know, the animation world is very, very different than, you know, horror movies and stuff. He didn't have people to introduce me to, like, you know, he didn't get me like an agent or anything like that. Like, you know, it's what he did do is, you know, him and I would just talk about storytelling. We would talk about my script ideas. He would help me. You know, I remember at one point in my life, I could go through a few things, but at one point in my life, my dad, I was like, you know, I can't write a story. I can't tell a story. My dad was like, well, you know, what's your story about? I'm like, this guy, like, or something. And he's like, okay. And what's he do? And I was like, he does this. And then he's like, okay. And like, he's like, well, why is he doing that? And I was like, well, because of this. And he's like, okay. And then, well, who wants him not to do that? And I was like, well, this guy probably doesn't. And he's like, okay. And so he asks me all these questions. And by the end of it, he's like, well, it sounds like you have a story.
Yeah.
And I was like, I was like, oh, snap. Like, I think there was like a confidence, you know, just being able to answer the questions. Right. And then I also know that, like, you know, my dad used to watch movies with me all the time. So he would, you know, sit down and we'd watch, you know, from an early age. I'm talking like 5-6 years old. We, you know, put on flipping Casablanca or something like that. And he'd play it, and then he'd like pause it and ask me questions about, like, you know, why do you think the film was shot this way? Why do you think this is like, it's all stuff like I had no clue what the hell any of that meant, but I was like answering questions. And then, you know, the more I started to watch movies, the more I started to understand why he was asking and what he was asking, to a point where, like, you know, by the age of, like, you know, 15, you know, 13, 14, I'd been watching movies with him every day for years, and I'd get these questions. I'd be like, oh, you know, this is, obviously this is to set up this. Oh, the camera's moving at this point. And I started, like, and I'd be like, oh, well, the motivation here is being set up as that. Like, I started to analyze every piece of movies, just from a young age, because he was, you know, that's what we would talk about, and that's what we would do. That was, like, you know, our connection. And then, you know, I think at the age of, I believe I was 12 at the time. You know, Kill Bill Volume 1 came out in theaters, and my dad took me to go see Kill Bill Volume 1. And I remember everybody was like, why are you taking your son to see this? The ticket taker stopped us. He was like, don't let him in. Like this, and like they called over the manager, and the manager's like, sir, do you realize that this movie is extremely violent and inappropriate for a child? Like, are you sure you want your son to see this? And my dad was like, yeah, of course I do.
Brilliant.
And so I went into the theater and with my dad, and I felt like I had like won the lottery, like I had gotten away with something like I was seeing something I wasn't supposed to. And that's when I realized like films could not only be like, you know, like dangerous, but like, you know, exciting. And that's when I started to kind of really shift my focus towards really wanting to make movies. And obviously also, you know, big fan of Uma Thurman.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Cool. So it sounds like you've had a sort of a well-guided journey towards your career path, but almost it sounds very organic at the same time. It's by no means nepotism, you know.
No. My dad handed me knowledge. That was what I got. I didn't get handouts like career-wise in this stuff. I was born with an amazing mentor. You know, he never got me. There was no nepotism. He never got me any work. You know, the one times I worked with my dad, I hired him to work with me. That was like a shining moment for me. I was like, I got my dad a job, you know. No, I never, you know, if I had, I would have been writing on a ton of cartoon shows. Like, but you know, I just he handed me a lot of knowledge. And that's something that, you know, I will always cherish. And one thing that you know, he also put up with my crazy antics, because like, you know, I wouldn't, you know, I'd get a book report in middle school and high school, and I would make a short film about why I didn't feel like doing the book report, and I turned that in instead. And like, you know, he'd find that funny. My mom didn't find that funny. I remember one time my parents, it was the first time I had seen them in the same room since they got divorced. And it was because the principal and the teacher called them in and said, you know, I think I was in like 10th grade, and they're like, you know, he's going to fail out of chemistry and he won't be able to graduate. Like, he hasn't done any of his homework. Like, you know, he's a smart kid. Why is he not doing it? And I remember sitting in the room with both of them, and I like looked back and forth, and I looked to the principal and I said, listen, I'm not going to need chemistry when I'm making movies. And my dad laughed, and everybody else in the room was like silent, saying like, this is a pipe dream. This is ridiculous. Like, well, not that I'm encouraging like that kind of behavior, but like, I was just so single-mindedly focused for, you know, 90% of my life.
And I'm completely on board with everything you've said. And disclaimer, James, that's me coming from my day job as a teacher. I'm a secondary school teacher, so and I'm on board with everything you've just said. So that's really cool. We've lost Dave, but we're going to plow on without him. He's had a connection problem, and but we've only got a couple of minutes left. But just very quickly, James, what's next for you? What can you tell us about? What are you able to tell us about?
So the next thing for me is The Fortress, which is it's coming out in pretty soon. And it's another movie I did with Bruce. I froze there for a second because I was like, am I allowed to announce when it's actually coming out? But it's coming out soon.
Wonderful.
And that's the next thing after this. So
great.
The Fortress.
It sounds really exciting. Fantastic. James, it's been an absolute pleasure. And I'll say on behalf of me and Dave, like I said, we lost him earlier, but thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great all the way from LA. Cheers.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And thanks for reaching out. I'm so happy this worked out. I'm so glad I could come on your show.
Thank you. Cheers.